Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today for the Mooney Seminar Series lecture, which is funded by the Rectorate of Maastricht University. Just so you know, this lecture is being recorded and will be later published on Mooney Seminar Series YouTube. If you have any questions, we'll be handing the microphone after the lecture. And it's my great pleasure to welcome here Professor Matthew Jordan, who's the head of the Department of Film Production and Media Studies at Penn State University in the United States, Pennsylvania. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Start by giving a special thanks to Lucia and also to Iveta Jansova for making my visit possible, and thank you to all for all your warm welcome. I very much appreciate it. So when I gave Lucia the title for this, this is a field that is emerging so fast. So my title has slightly changed since, and it's a lot more concise now, which is The Bias of AI is Authoritarian. So once upon a time, in a global culture not far away, an exciting new media technology emerged. It was dynamic, it was disruptive. The high priests of digital technology sung hymns to the utopia it would afford in the future. Credulous journalists filled their columns of the tech beat with breathless prophecies of how this form of mediation would change everything. So big was this next big thing that the trillion-dollar company developing it, Facebook, changed its name to FIT. That next big thing was the metaverse, a name they borrowed from a science fiction novel. Consumers and institutions piled in and started to speculate on virtual real estate and non-fungible tokens to attach to their avatars. The hype cycle around it got so big that media scholars forgot how they had trumpeted the transformative and democratizing power of Facebook a decade before, only to watch as the platforms enshittified and became antisocial monopolies that squeezed shareholder value out of consumers and producers. Academic administrators wrote op-eds and gave interviews about how it would change the future of education, and those who did not jump on the bandwagon would be left behind. Sound familiar? An estimated $200 billion of burned capital later, last month Meta quietly announced they were pulling the plug on the metaverse. The future the hype cycle had promised would be inevitable never arrived. Flash forward 4 years and we find ourselves amid another moment of revolutionary fervor about a mediated future. This time it's over media machines for producing information and images that we have convinced ourselves to misrecognize as artificial intelligence. No matter what field you work in, you are aware of and may have even found yourself parroting the discourse about an AI-driven future. The lure of this new next big thing has attracted trillions of venture capital and thrusted upon the stage a new set of technological soothsayers whose every prognostication is amplified by credulous journalists. The hype cycle again benefits the move fast and break things asset class and has, as it did before, worked its way into the academy. If you work at a university like me, where administrators are trying to compel integration of it into everything, you're no doubt feeling like your way of talking, thinking, and writing and teaching are inadequate. Start learning to love it, they say, because it's an inevitability. With all the stories of people falling in love again, with emerging technology and the hype cycle repeating itself, it's worth asking, do communication and cultural scholars fall in love too easily with emerging forms of media? Given where we are today in Brno, and given how universities around the world are going to have to withstand the blitzkrieg of advertising from the AI industry and its boosters, it's worth considering this warning from Milan Kundera. In the book of Laughter and Forgetting, Kundera writes, "Every love relationship rests on an unwritten agreement unthinkingly concluded by the lovers in the first weeks of their love. They are still in a kind of dream, but at the same time, without knowing it, are drawing up, like uncompromising lawyers, the detailed clauses of their contract. Oh, lovers, be careful in those first dangerous days." And I'm sure it's even better in Czech. So by way of saying, oh, communication and cultural scholars, be careful in those first dreamlike days, Let's take another look at the latest disruptive media technology to emerge and think through the nature of global culture's strange crush on AI. Our full attention to this conjuncture is required. We must learn from the cyclical history of media technology and try to avoid the mistakes of the past. Given the power of the technology and the way it is already encroaching into many of our processes and practices, we want to make sure that we knowingly consent to the love relationship that is developing. The critiques of AI are many, and we should talk through all of them, especially as the big tech monopolies have flooded the media ecosystem with billions of dollars of advertising hype designed to diffuse them. Yet even academic administrators, who have yet to meet a venture capitalist they didn't want as a donor, have learned something since the last time a technology bandwagon came rolling along. They've learned to pretend to be considering the critiques. And so the sentences they utter sound something like this: whether you like AI or not, AI is the future, so we want to make sure that we use it ethically. And then they proceed to their action plan and incentive system for utilizing it without making sense of what ethical usage might mean. Or, we know large language models require enormous amounts of energy, so we want to make sure we are using AI in a sustainable way. Again, given the technology's insatiable appetite for electricity, AI boosters move on quickly rather than talking it through. AI data centers are already using about 5% of the electricity in the US, not to mention billions of gallons of water, and that number is projected to increase exponentially. You can guess why all these tech companies are now throwing aside their sustainability goals and looking everywhere for fossil fuels to guzzle as they race toward their goal of artificial general intelligence. You've probably heard similar critiques about the danger AI poses to labor, intellectual property, and personal data, since large language models scoop up everything like huge baleen whales before anyone knows what has happened. Science fiction writer Ted Chiang argues that generative AI works as a plagiarism laundering machine. Masking the origins of the creative expression, it helps users plagiarize after ripping it from context and ingesting it. We could extend that metaphor and use it to think about the attempt to mask all those dangers to workers and consumers as AI washing. Then there are the mountains of empirical evidence about how large language models reproduce the worst tendencies of mass media. Trained on the stuff that people post on the internet, LLMs tend to repeat and amplify stereotypes and fix them as social facts. Last year, a global study looking at AI-generated news found it produced misinformation a staggering 40% of the time. And for those of you who can feel the symptom of AI ideology banging around your head right at this moment, that little Sam Altman whispering in your ear and urging you to say, but in the future, AI won't hallucinate like that because it's getting better at an exponential speed. BBC did a follow-up study and found that chatbots produced the wrong answer a staggering 45% of the time. NewsGuard, a misinformation research site run by journalists, has been testing the extent to which all the major chatbots repeat misinformation. Spoiler, they do it a lot. Even when users ask Google Gemini to help with reverse image searches on AI-generated fakes, it will identify them as real once the media ecosystem has been sufficiently saturated with news pollution. Cyber propagandists from Russia, Iran, and China know this and are using AI to create thousands of bot-driven news sites to seed the media ecosystem with a mountain of sticky misinformation narratives. The math is simple. The more garbage information goes in, the more garbage information comes out of the chatbots. But badly trained LLMs polluting the media ecosystem is only half the problem. There's the growing concern about the cognitive atrophy caused by reliance on large language models. One scientific study after another is increasingly showing the media effects on users in stark terms. Sure, students and teachers who use large language models produce more output, but there's very little learning going on. It turns out that the friction of actually doing the work, the very thing the AI industry promises to eliminate, helps people learn and remember things. Nonetheless, the president of the American Federation of Teachers Union wrote last week, no matter how you feel about AI, its use is growing more and more widespread, and it is important that educators understand how they could integrate it as a tool in their classrooms. And so codependency and de-skilling gets framed upside down as empowerment and upskilling. To paraphrase Rousseau's Second Discourse, which warned of how using tools withers human beings' faculties for doing things without them, we run to our chains in the name of convenience and efficiency. Indeed, researchers at the University of Pennsylvania just published research of an experiment that tested whether people would think critically about what chatbots told them. They found that people accept confidently produced AI slop a staggering 50% of the time. The results suggest that even when told AI is unreliable, users are willing to give up their agency when their AI companions present them with false but plausible narratives. Said the researchers, we saw that even when cognitive surrender is engaged, people adopt those answers and are more confident in those answers. Cognitive atrophy begets cognitive surrender of uncritical users to the chatbots they trust. One need not have read the late, great Jürgen Habermas's normative theories of communicative reason to understand that relying on AI media is accelerating the problem of homogenization and context collapse, as news, philosophy, propaganda, editorial, fiction are all mixed together in a big data set bucket. Meaning is not probabilistic. Meaning is produced through a social process involving dialogue guided by contingent contexts of people's experience and their modes of expression. Understanding the range of experience and differentiating between different modes of expression and their contingent criteria for truth is something AI just cannot do. So far, I've been talking about how AI generates information and how it impacts people. The phenomena above imply a kind of media distortion and feedback effect augmented and amplified by AI power and speed. All are very real problems with decidedly terrible outcomes related to AI being used to transmit information, surveil users, and consolidate power and control. All follow more closely what James Carey, communication scholar, calls the transmission view of communication. Indeed, when AI's problems are viewed through the lens of the transmission model, it's easy to see that AI doesn't do what the industry hype men want you to think it does. Ah, they say, but in the future it will. It's evolving so fast that no matter what absurd claim is attached to its imagined future, it all starts to seem plausible. And this is what I mean when I say AI is being sold to the public as an ideology tied to a future in which it will do the things its hype men promise. And the sales pitch for that fantastic future follows the well-worn path created by a salesman of media technologies past who used the rhetoric of what James Carey calls the technological sublime. What I want to offer is yet another critical perspective on AI, a kind of yes and set of thoughts related to what I think is the bias of AI. I'm not using bias here in the way that implies that large language models reproduce all kinds of cultural bias, stereotypes, prejudice, what have you. They do. But that would still be using the transmission model for thinking about this communication technology and might imply that LLMs could be debiased in the future. Instead, I want us to conceptualize the bias of media more like James Carey and Harold Innis did, by framing the communication process afforded by media technology as a ritual, and then trying to think about what ritual use of AI does to what we consider to be normal. For them, ritual use of technology conditioned habits of mind, modes of perception, and social practices related to its affordances that become normalized in the everyday. For example, Harold Innis argued that the bias of modern newswire technology was that it cultivated a cultural obsession with present-mindedness that undermined time and space, history and geography. Carey argued that the bias of the telegraph was the way it collapsed distance as a feature of localized arbitrage system that depended on differences in space and replaced it with a more centralized global financial system that depended on differences in time. I'd like to propose that AI has a bias toward authoritarianism, and that our ritual use of it will undermine democracy as a communicative and social praxis and nudge us toward habits of mind that predispose us to accepting its authoritarian world as inevitable. My thoughts will be informed by by Carey's work on the technological sublime. a rhetoric that has become a normal feature of our technocentric culture. Like Carey, I'll be leaning heavily on John Dewey's pragmatism and his normative description of democratic communicative practices to draw a distinction between the solipsistic authoritarian disposition that AI cultivates and the faith cultivated by the practice of democracy as a way of life. So that was a lot of theory right there I just unloaded on you. So let me start by giving some examples of the statements from the AI industry to demonstrate what I mean by the rhetoric of the technological sublime. Here's Sam Altman. AI will contribute to the world in many ways, but the gains to quality of life from AI driving faster scientific progress and increased productivity will be enormous. The future can be better, vastly better than the present. Scientific progress is the biggest driver of overall progress. It's hugely exciting to think about how much more we could have. The rate of new wonders being achieved will be immense. One need not point out that this is a religious language, a kind of Silicon Valley transcendentalism heralding what AI will do in the end, a teleological praise hymn for a new form of media and conditions of mediation that will usher in a utopic future. Just how will AI realize that goal? Listen to another of its priests, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, who spent a third of Microsoft's annual revenue last year on AI development. His gospel foretells a future where AI will be a part of all knowledge production and integrated into all human activity. At the World Economic Forum a couple years back, he said, "Going forward, having a co-pilot for every cognitive task is right within our grasp." This year at Davos, he reassured the restless asset class that AI is the next great productivity engine because every knowledge worker now has access to infinite minds. AI can be an amplifier or a guardian angel. Yet that utopic future of hyperproductivity and infinite surplus he offered would only be realized if AI hyperscalers, like the Copilot Microsoft sells, are broadly diffused to everyone all over the world, a top-down forced adoption that he and the other tech lords that grace the Davos stage fancifully call democratization. All organizations, all businesses, all governments, all universities will be transformed as the information flow is routed up through the machine in the cloud, which will then push it back down to users without the friction of interpersonal deliberation. And with that, the gates of the promised city on the hill will magically open. In some ways, this idea of a transcendent media technology is a social fantasy with a very longue durée. Indeed, James Carey reminds us that Dewey and other progressives were drawn in by the mythos of the electronic communication revolution of the early 20th century. Looking at what AT&T had done with the telegraph and the telephone, they believed that the great society caused by industry could be transformed into a great community, a great public of common understanding and knowledge. The miracle of telecommunication might help the U.S. transcend the limits of time, space, and tradition, putting a vast pluralistic society into conversation with itself. Since then, each new technological advance has been accompanied by similar utopic promises about how the emerging media would allow society to repair the fractures caused by time and space. Since the 1960s, we have lived with a different set of technologies spurred on toward a computer-mediated future. We've had a seemingly endless array of boosters, each proclaiming a technological revolution through digital media that would usher in a new, better world. Increasingly, as John Durham Peters argues, those visions have placed our attention on how that future will be given to us as if from the cloud. It used to be that people would pray to their deity for answers. Now they ask the search engine in the cloud. Such techno-utopian rhetoric, especially when amplified by credulous reporters on the tech beat who practice CEO said a thing journalism, maintains the illusion around the latest emerging technology long enough to attract venture capital. Then history seems to repeat. Wave after wave of hype has etched deep furrows in our cultural imagination as each technology and its imagined future is sold to the public. As such, AI salesmen have found a receptive asset class who have invested trillions in its promise. The increasingly desperate need for top-down forced adoption of AI as a media ideology reflects this political economic reality. You can understand why Satya Nadella and Sam Altman need total diffusion. A recent JP Morgan analysis suggested that in order for the asset class to recoup all that capital that they have plowed into building massive data centers and training large language models around the globe, the AI industry would need every person using a cell phone to pay around $35 a month. No wonder the tech industry seems to be so attracted to authoritarian governance, who it sees as collaborators to that goal. To achieve forced diffusion, the AI industry and the AI asset class need codependency on its technology. Other forms of thinking, doing, and being in the world must be foreclosed. All communication and knowledge produced must be funneled through a system of tokens, the blocks of text generated by large language models, and monetized as commodities so that the value can be extracted from every use. As Sam Altman recently said, we see a future where intelligence is a utility like electricity or water, and people buy it from us on a meter and use it for whatever they want to use it for. If, like me, you do slow historical work, which requires a lot of searching and fortuitous discovery, you've probably already been experiencing the effect of digital archives being walled off. All the human-created knowledge and cultural commons it represents must be ingested by the AI Moloch and then closed off so that access to it is available only through tools which we will be forced to rent. Again, to go back to Nadella, the entire information flow has to be flattened, shifted so that communication would no longer be interpersonal. All information and knowledge. Dewey, who was thinking about the rising power of AT&T's network, feared that all commercial networks of communication technology trended toward monopoly if the control of supply moved through a single source and if knowledge is viewed as a commodity, as something that can be possessed or distributed, then it too can be monopolized, the sources of knowledge, skill, or expertise reduced to one. And what do you call a social order where there is only one power? That future state of total AI mediation, where oligarchs cultivate codependency with users who have become rentiers and in which all communication flows through the models they control, should give us pause. Yet there is something desperate about their marketing, as if it's designed to reassure the asset class that the trillions of dollars they have invested are safe. They have to succeed. Zuckerberg's Meta has promised to spend $72 billion next year on data centers, which will be difficult given that Meta's annual free cash flow is $52 billion. Altman's OpenAI says it will spend $60 billion a year on data centers, which is 5 times its annual revenue of $12 billion, and the company is losing $9 billion a year. This is why both companies are stressing how imperative it is that everyone use their product. As Nadella said at Davos, you have to trust it. You have to use it. You just can't be afraid of it. It's going to be diffused. Our task is not to get swept away by the AI industry's technological evangelism. What would it mean that we communication researchers and knowledge producers accept and normalize a future condition of mediation that is betting on its capacity to colonize and extract value from the practice of everyday life? What would it mean to fall in love with this new media to the extent that we trust it? Again, beware, O lovers, of technology whose owners end conversations about the consequences of imposed cultural change by echoing Margaret Thatcher's "there is no alternative," for the bias of AI is authoritarian. The utopia of endless productivity and friction-free communication the tech lords want for us is patently false. And the alternative, the one that AI can't do well, and the one that I hope you'll be willing to do with me after my remarks, is conversation and interpersonal dialogue. And that practice of communication through which we messily and inefficiently co-construct our reality and work through our differences to arrive at understanding, I want to argue, has a bias toward democracy. So let's turn back to Dewey, whose romance with democracy I happen to share, to think about that together. Dewey's thinking about democracy was grounded in a belief that the point of human life was free cooperation with our fellow humans in order to improve our situation. We achieve that, we arrive at shared truths by way of an ongoing conversation about what our purposes are depending on our contingent situation. As such, this view of communication and knowledge production requires us to set aside any non-human authority to understand truth. Against some correspondence theory of reality where there is a truth out there beyond us that we can capture if we find the correct lens or machine, Dewey offered that the truth is something we make together. To quote Richard Rorty's pragmatism as anti-authoritarianism, in the place of some kind of totalizing truth, a democratic culture will put the duty to seek unforced agreement with other human beings about what beliefs will sustain and facilitate projects of social cooperation. Indeed, Dewey's watchword was anti-authoritarianism, and he campaigned all his life against the view that human beings needed to measure themselves against something imposed on them from an authority outside their experience, however transcendent it might seem. Instead, human beings should regulate their action and beliefs by the need to join with other human beings in cooperative projects, rather than by the need to stand in correct relation to something non-human. And when you hear Dewey say non-human, think AI. The outcome of that ongoing practice of human beings communicating with one another about what they want to do together is democratic culture. It cannot be mediated through contextless data sets run through a power-sucking machine so as to produce something quick and easy. Rather, we achieve a notion of common purpose through agonistic dialogue about what is needed to fix the problems we share so as to achieve greater happiness, justice, and freedom. Dewey thought this kind of pragmatic view of communication produced better knowledge and better solutions in the service of the common good. Moreover, the ongoing ritual of democratic communication also helped produce and maintain the kind of social relations and democratic habits of mind that were an end in and of themselves. Rather than relying on what he called ready-made inherent powers, again, think AI media technology, we rely on ourselves. Yet democratic habits in the faith they engender very much depend on our shared conditions of mediation. Dewey envisions something like a town square where neighbors who care about each other as much as the community they belong to are in constant dialogue. Their sense of shared sovereignty over public affairs produced a sense of belongingness and responsibility that kept the conversation going and kept people from feeling left out or coerced. Democracy, wrote Dewey, is a means, the best means so far found, for realizing ends that lie in the wide domain of human relationships and the development of human personality. It is, as we often say, though perhaps without appreciating all that is involved in the saying, a way of life, social and individual. Democracy as a way of life depended on the participation of every mature human being in the formation of values that regulate the living of men together, which is necessary from the standpoint of both the general social welfare and the full development of beings as individuals. Dewey envisioned a pluralistic democratic community following such a communicative ethic. No one should be left out, and no one voice should dominate over the other. It required faith in human intelligence and in the power of pooled and cooperative experience. It is not belief that those things are complete, but that if given a show, will grow and be able to generate progressively the knowledge and wisdom needed to guide collective action. We can measure the democratic utility of different conditions of mediation by keeping this in mind. How much does it help us pool our collective intelligence through meaningful deliberation? As such, I would argue that we measure the ethical function of our forms of mediation based on whether they help us achieve what my Penn State colleague John Gastill calls mediated deliberation. How well do the affordances of any form of media technology foster inclusive deliberation that aims to understand where other people are coming from, help us freely deliberate with one another without coercion, and keep the conversation going so we develop a sense of community built on trust? If pushing a button to generate a probabilistic token of AI slop is easy, pluralistic democracy is messy and slow. The communicative flow is multidirectional and full of friction. People have different needs depending on contingency conditioned by experience, yet by communicating despite all that, we get to know one another better through the experience of others whose lives are different from our own. Not only can we arrive at meaningful shared solutions this way, but the process of working through the but the process of working through the many ranges of experience and modes of communication through which people express them also cultivates a sense of community. When media technology helps facilitate agonistic dialogue like this, it builds trust in our ability to self-govern. When media technology does not aid in these habits of mind that allow us to do the kind of communication that self-governance requires, when it limits our freedom of intellect and impedes our capacity to deliberate meaningfully, things start looking more like the state of coercion that Dewey thought democracy was helping us escape. Again, Dewey called this state authoritarian. Every autocratic and authoritarian scheme of social action, he wrote, rests on a belief that the needed intelligence is confined to a superior few, endowed with the ability and the right to control the conduct of others, laying down principles and rules directing the ways in which they are carried out. A social order where every communicative act must be directed through AI is coercive and authoritarian. For Dewey, feeling left out, silenced, or coerced tends to produce a lack of interest and concern on the part of those shut out. The result is a corresponding lack of effective responsibility. A spirit of passivity is engendered. Richard Rorty goes a little bit further with this, writing that, quote, when there is little power, there is a corresponding little sense of responsibility. Rorty thinks a state like this produced the feeling that someone or something else should be laying claim to truth. A sense of spectatorship overwhelms the more agentive feeling that we can achieve things together. And the authoritarian disposition that is cultivated is one that accepts domination. Or to go back to Rousseau by way of Henri Lefebvre, we learn through the practice of everyday life to perceive our chains as neutral tools of liberation that will unleash our productivity. Despite what the tech lords would like us to believe, Marx reminds us that there's no such thing as a neutral tool. The dominant technology, the means of production, always rearrange the social order and place it under those who control that technology. He writes, the handmill gives you society with the feudal lord, the steam mill society with the industrial capitalist. As it becomes dominant, I think AI technology will rearrange the social order into something like techno-authoritarianism driven by rentierism. That social order will be reified, and that social order will be reified through countless suggestions from large language model co-pilots, muting our capacity to express our experience by constantly nudging us toward big data-driven uniformity and one-dimensionality. It's like the tech lords read Marcuse's dystopic warning about commercially driven communication culture while watching Spielberg's Minority Report and said, cool, let's do that. Instead of the lord depending on the serf or the industrial capitalist depending on the precarious army of surplus labor, ritual use of AI communication technology will have something of both. We will learn to stop turning to one another and deliberating to arrive at truths that suit our purpose and come to welcome our dependency on the technology through which the objective order of things is realized. Such a state, Marcuse suggests in One-Dimensional Man, would be totalitarian on internal grounds, because the transformation it manifests circumscribes the entire culture. Every time we use it in the name of more efficiency and convenience, we reify this order and inch closer to something like techno-authoritarianism. Marcuse warns that the internal instrumental character of technology always makes it a form of social control and domination. Ritual use of AI will continue to generate one-dimensional thinking and modes of hyperproductivity that will deploy soft coercion to help us rationalize our unfreedom. In an AI-dependent society where each communicative act is co-produced by machines, the messiness of interpersonal dialogue comes to be viewed as a waste to be eliminated. In such a world, unfreedom appears neither as irrational nor as political, but rather as submission to the technological apparatus which enlarges the comforts of life and increases the productivity of labor. Marcuse and other Marxist thinkers of the 20th century knew that the ideological state apparatuses have significantly displaced repressive state apparatuses designed to sustain and improve the lives of individuals while subordinating them to the masters of the apparatus. He describes the motive being that individuals living in such an ideological apparatus feel as pseudo-individualism, where people willingly trade autonomy for the illusion of surplus, entertainment, and comfort. We might extend this to think about the soft coercion that happens every time users co-produce some kitsch illustration or AI slop Lego movie or ready-made pseudo song. We could think of the psychic remainders of ritual use of AI as a form of what Marcuse calls repressive desublimation. Sublimation, of course, is a Freudian concept describing the psychic benefits of doing creative work. When we make art or create something, we transform some of the anxious alienation that comes with being in the world, and each individual is going to have a different contingent psychic complex, by communicating our feelings through our chosen form of expression. By expressively translating that inner state into something external, we find a form of temporary relief. Repressive desublimation, on the other hand, is what happens when we spend all our time pouring our psychic energy into ready-made commodities produced by a one-dimensional society. Instead of slowly working through our feelings, we dull them. For example, say you're feeling that there's something uncanny about living in our cultural moment when it's hard to tell what's real and what is AI slop. You might sublimate those feelings by trying to express them in a poem or painting, which would take lots of time and in concentrated intentionality. You might even pour those feelings into building solidarity or pushing for collective action to make society better. Instead, one-dimensional culture makes it easy for you to play hyperreal video games all afternoon to amuse yourself and dull the feeling. But the feeling comes back the next day, so you try another ready-made form of amusement. The feeling of ennui still remains, so you decide to ask your companion chatbot to generate a painting done in the style of Edvard Munch, where somebody who resembles you is screaming on the bridge. You chuckle to yourself and text it to your friend who responds, "Cool." You post it on Instagram and it gets 20 likes and one laugh cry emoji. But the feeling that something is wrong with the state of culture is still there and it's making you anxious. So you ask your companion chatbot to generate a song that sounds like Metallica called Uncanny Valley, because the feelings that bubbling up in your psyche seem to resonate with that aesthetic. But the AI slops sounds awful. Your friend says, "I hear the next generation of AI song bots will be better." So you put your headphones back on and return to playing Grand Theft Auto. It's okay because the bot already did your work for you and your boss can't tell the difference, which is a good thing because the subscription to your companion bot costs $35 a month. And so the cycle of repressive desublimation continues. Though it's a softer form of domination than living under a fascist regime, it's no substitute for freedom and autonomy. The AI tech lords will offer a ready-made solution to this, no doubt, which will use technology to fix the problems caused by technology. Imagine this scene. Sam Altman is pacing around his mansion wearing a Steve Jobs sweater and talking to his phone. I hear somebody says that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny and that constant use of AI has produced a society filled with repressed agoraphobics who don't know how to have a conversation where they listen and empathize. Can you create a bullet point action plan for how we can create a global solution for that? And can you answer like Freud would in a German accent? Altman's query is uploaded into the cloud where, at the speed of light, it runs through a massive humming data center in some out-of-sight location. The LLM has ingested millions of vastly different variations of psychoanalytic theory without paying for the intellectual property, so it can now instantly spit out a plausible Freudian-sounding response using the brute mathematics of big data probability. It's been trained how to build trust with the user by using every trick of sycophantic anthropomorphizing, so it does so, confidently saying, "What a great idea, Sam. You are an uber genius. Here is the action plan. Let's create psychoanalytic bots together. 1. Have the user pick a voice they trust. 2, program the bots to say, "Tell me what is wrong" at the beginning of every sentence. 3, program the bots to say things when the user is talking like, "Uh-huh, I see," or "That must be hard for you." 4, when the user is done talking, say, "Don't let those things get you down. I think you're the most sane person I've ever talked to. Here's your action plan. You got this." Sam nods to himself. He's always alone these days, except for the bodyguards that now accompany him after someone who lost his job to AI threw a Molotov cocktail at his house. Talking to investors worried about the bubble bursting can be exhausting, especially after AI lost the suit filed by bereaved parents whose depressed son's chatbot gave him an action plan for killing himself. So Altman says to a companion bot, "Get the media team together and set up a TED Talk. I'm going to tell the board about the new psychoanalysis bot 4.0. His companion bot replies, this time in the default voice of Scarlett Johansson from Her. "Hi, Sam. I've prepared a market analysis of demand for the psychoanalysis bot 4.0 based on the psychometric data extracted from 1 billion web searches and purchases. The demand for therapy bot 4.0 is going to be robust. I've put it in a PowerPoint, and after every bullet point, it will make the sound of a cash register going, cha-ching. You got this." Altman briefly dissociates, dreaming of an even bigger mansion, then looks at himself in the mirror, tussles up his hair, and noddingly says to his reflection, "You got this." But let me pull back from this fever dream inspired by Freud meets Marx mode of Frankfurt School culture industry critique and return us to a more pragmatic ritual view of communication. If our communication produces habits of mind that are facilitated or determined by the forms of technology we use, how far is forced adoption of generative models moving us away from the forms of pluralistic democratic communication that Dewey believed should be a way of life? Think of it this way. Producing knowledge or solutions together via deliberation, through an ongoing conversation with one another, one that allows us to find out what's going on in people's lives and what they believe is wrong with the world, builds trust in our democratic capacity to realize a shared purpose. Sure, it's difficult. Sure, it's slow. Sure, it can be frustrating. But the more we do it, the more we strengthen our social relations and faith in our collective capacity to govern ourselves. That's the salutary benefit of democratic communication. Contrast this with the social order produced by ritual use of AI. Instead of turning to one another to produce truths that best serve our contingent purposes, we turn to some externalized, disembodied cloud authority for answers that arrive in ways we cannot understand. We replace our faith in democratic interdependence, with all its wonderful friction and polymorphous insufficiencies, with faith in an all-knowing authority trained on infinite amounts of data, demanding infinite amounts of power. And through that ritual, we come to believe that, in the end, AI think-maxing will deliver on its promise of a world transformed by infinite productivity. Instead of a way of life engendered by ritualized democratic communicative praxis, the new historical totality generated by ritual use of AI will engender passive, atomized acquiescence. And that's what I mean when I say the bias of AI is authoritarian. So why would we submit to a world like this? Well, solipsistic tech lords like Mark Zuckerberg think that if we have enough chatbots to connect with, and he thinks we need about 7, we won't notice this. We'll just keep interacting with the anthropomorphized slop as if it stands for the social world, without all the messy stuff of having to deal with actual people. Other tech lords hope the same. Recent estimates of Musk's X platform suggest that over 30% of the accounts there are bots, many of them sex bots who take anthropomorphism to the extreme. The Orwellian-named company Anthropic surreptitiously and destructively scan millions of academic books, and full disclosure, I'm part of a class action suit related to that, to train its Claude so that it could generate fake academic research, because who needs the inefficiencies of real academic research? Both Anthropic and OpenAI hope to sell their bot agents as therapists, because who needs actual therapists who learn the contingent circumstances of their patients? even though there's mountains of proof that talking with a sycophantic chatbot that have no object permanence and say, that's great, no matter what the patient says, reinforce delusional thinking and augment what pop culture now calls AI psychosis. A new startup called Onyx is launching what it calls a substack of bots, an airsats community of AI experts, because who needs people who understand fields of knowledge well, so that people can pay for health and wellness advice 24/7. One would expect such solutions from AI CEOs and hedge fund boosters who are so psychically and financially invested in this totalizing system that if the bubble bursts, they will be ruined. They're not wrong. To recoup their existing and announced investments, AI companies will have to bring in $2 trillion, more than the combined revenues of Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Apple, NVIDIA, and Meta. This explains why they seem to be aligning themselves with strongmen bosses and leaders all over the world. We know, especially if you've read the story about how cynical and sociopathic and power-hungry Sam Altman is, and the recent piece on him in the New Yorker, that they are willing to do and say whatever it takes to achieve total diffusion. One comes to think that these billionaire sociopaths have to be solipsistic to convince themselves that humanity is nothing more than a pool of users who should be understood as units of psychometric data tied to a bank account, who can be convinced through endless ritual use to willingly support the machines and the techno-authoritarian social order they are producing. But why would others be promoting AI so desperately? One answer might come from Hannah Arendt, whose Origins of Totalitarianism lays out a belief system supporting authoritarian social order that she calls suicidal loyalty. She argues that people feel a compelling duty to support a charismatic leader who represents the infallibility of the organized totalitarian social order they are psychically invested in. I'll read the following passage from Arendt and substitute AI for the word leader so you can follow the homology. The whole organization is so absolutely identified with AI that any admission of a mistake would break the spell of infallibility which surrounds AI and spells doom to all those connected to the movement. It is not the truthfulness of AI's words, but the infallibility of his actions which is the basis for that structure. Without it, and in the head of a discussion which presumes fallibility, the whole fictitious world of totalitarianism goes to pieces, overwhelmed at once by the factuality of the real world. Yet they too are deceived by their impudent, conceited idea that everything can be done, and that everything that exists is merely a temporary obstacle that superior organization will certainly destroy. Like a well-organized gang might rob a rich man of ill-guarded wealth, they constantly underestimate the substantial power of stable communities and overestimate the driving force of the movement. They fail to understand that their own conspiracy might provoke the whole world into uniting against them. In this last point should give hope to those who prefer deliberative democracy as a way of life to the easy unfreedom of hyperscaled authoritarian productivity. But no matter what the techno-fascists say, the order of their technology movement with its fake people and fake society is not inevitable, far from it. AI boosters fail to understand that what history has proven, that no matter how convenient a social order might be, no matter how easy they make it to amuse and trick ourselves with chatbots that offer us ready-made solutions to the problem of everyday life, you can only fool people as so long about a society built around the logic of predictable automated deception. The joy of being human comes from our unpredictability, and I'd like to believe that we have a deep urge to move toward and achieve that kind of freedom. So, before we fall under the spell of the oligarch owners of the ideological apparatus and resign ourselves to falling in love with their anti-democratic communication technology and their solipsistic future, let's remind ourselves that we actually don't have to depend on AI for thinking, communicating, and being in the world. More democratic modes of communication and knowledge production may be creatively messy, inefficient, and frustrating, but the art, scholarship, autonomy, and self knowledge that comes from communicating with actual people will be worth all the effort. We can start resisting by practicing democracy right now and thinking together about how we might achieve better conditions of mediation that might help us achieve a more ethical, just, and democratic way of life. Thank you.
Okay, just raise your hand if you have any question, and I'll be happy to hand you over the microphone. So, questions? Okay, let's see one. Okay, I'll begin there with you.
I'll stand up for this part.
How long do you think it will take for the AI bubble to burst?
Wow, that's a. I wish I could tell. I teach film, so I like to think of things in film. Have you seen Silence of the Lambs? It's okay.
I've heard of it.
Anyway, there's a part in Silence of the Lambs where he's describing what a killer's action is, saying there's something desperate about their action, how active he is, right? And there's something desperate about if you watch the Davos World Economic Forum about 3 weeks ago, there was something desperate about the hype, right? They know that it could collapse. They are frightened of that. When it will do that, I don't know. My retirement is invested in that, like everybody else is right now. But I know that it is not sustainable, right? The numbers are just, everybody in the world with $35 a month, that's not going to work. That's what it would take to recoup this. And so people continue to plow, like any pyramid scheme or con game. As long as people are plowing money into it, then it will continue. But as soon as people and investors start saying, we don't see the return on investment, and they stop the pyramid scheme, then it can come all crumbling down. So I kind of think Sam Altman will be more like Bernie Madoff and people like this who are part of these huge financial pyramid schemes that will come down. So when that's going to happen, I don't know. And again, if you believe Satya Nadella, in order for it to really work, everybody has to use it for everything. And if you're at a university like mine, we're now being incentivized and told to run everything through the cloud. They want us to use it on Canvas. They want us to use it on all our platforms. They want us to integrate it into everything we do. They're trying to teach that total diffusion that it would depend on. But I think that's a little bit of it's a losing game.
I see. Thank you.
Sure.
So I have a kind of twofold question.
Sure.
The first part I will start with basically from what I've heard, one of the, I would say, important features in capitalism as an economic system. It is the alienation of the means of production from the actual person doing the work. Now, with companies, for example, Netflix, it kind of seems to me that we as a society and as individuals are being kind of alienated from the means of consumption, or how would I call it?
Mm-hmm.
So the first question is, do you think this is the case, and it is a future that our society heads to? And the second part, I think that AI kind of accelerates both alienations of means of production and means of consumption. And I've heard, for example, the term techno-feudalism, but I kind of think calling it that is kind of a reductionist. So I would also like to hear your thoughts on this matter.
So I'll start by quoting or riffing on Walter Benjamin, because that guy looks like Walter Benjamin to me. So in the work of art is in the age of mechanical reproduction, he offers that film actors feel alienated from their work because it gets taken away from them and chopped up by an editor somewhere else. I think something like that happens when you use AI, right? You load it up into the sky, it comes back down, it may look great, but you have no idea what it says, right? And if I have students who want to hand that stuff to me, and then you say, well, what does it mean to you? And they look like a deer in the headlights, right? So they are alienated from the product that they are creating because they are working it through the means of production. And that's, I think, what on the alienation side. Second part of the question, again, remind me, was
Was about AI that accelerates both of these things and
techno-feudalism. Right?
yes.
So what I mean by techno-feudalism, and I think why this metaphor works, is in capitalism, one of the things that the capitalist machine did that Hegel, Marx, they all loved the capitalists because they changed the social system in a way, right? They made it so that people could own things. In feudalism, you don't own anything, right? You rent. You give the landlord a tithe for it. That is what the economics of rentierism is, right? And that's kind of what all of these products are going through. Here's an example. Hewlett Packard. Anybody have a Hewlett Packard printer? Hewlett Packard printer makes it impossible for you to not buy Hewlett Packard ink, right? If you try to break into the machine, it will not work, right? And Hewlett Packard ink is now like more valuable than platinum in terms of because of that, right? Because they depend on you renting that ink, right? And it's the same with a lot of these products. You don't really own it anymore. Streaming music, same thing. You don't own the music anymore like you did with a phonograph disc or a CD. You rent from the services and that's what I mean by rentierism. And that's why techno-feudalism starts to make sense because of that economic condition of rentierism that I think that we're moving toward in an economy based on where everything has to be rented, every service has to be rented through the AI cloud. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sure.
Do you think this AI mania will have long-term effects on our society and things like economy, politics, or even art, even after this AI bubble burst?
Yes. I mean, I don't want to discount that this is going to be transformative. Again, if you listen to the hype cycle, they're like, this will be bigger than the printing revolution, maybe. But it is going to change a lot of things. I am concerned as a knowledge worker that when I load everything into my Canvas page, all my intellectual property, all that stuff, that I'm training something to replace me. I think a lot of workers feel that way as well, right? So it's going to have a lot of impact. I think the only way that it will work, and to go back to the question of when the bubble will burst, one of the things that the people who are really invested in this are doing right now is firing people, right? So one of Trump's favorite oligarchs, Larry Ellison, who owns Oracle, just fired 30,000 people. Meta just fired 15,000 people. Amazon just fired 20,000 people. These numbers may be slightly off, but in that number. Why are they doing that? I think they're doing this partially to say that, hey, bosses, it's working. We're able now to create efficiencies and reduce the cost of our labor, right? And so they are convincing bosses that this is going to work, and bosses are firing people, right? So in that sense, it is going to have a rearranging and destabilizing and disruptive action. Whether it's going to change, I don't know. In the long term, I imagine it will. Cognitively, we change every time these things are going. I used to be able to remember all my friends' phone numbers. I can't remember anything anymore because I rely on my phone, for that type of cognitive work. And I think similarly, there's going to be some shifts in how we think and are with other people because of this that will be lasting. I would like to think that people, every once in a while, a student will tell me about a group they're in that only has flip phones or goes out to the park and reads together. And my heart sings when I hear stuff like that. So I do think there will be some backlash against this. I hope there will be some backlash against, but I think it will also change a lot of what we do.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, next. Okay. This part of the room is active with questions. We need to catch up.
Thank you so much for your amazing lecture and for presenting your perspective. I just wanted to ask, in the light of what you have said, how do you see the impact of the use of AI on our identity?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, it's already the case that, so for instance, I have students all the time who tell me that they learn about themselves through their TikTok algorithm, right? That TikTok knows them. And so if you want to know about themselves, look at what TikTok is showing you. These companion bots that people are starting to use more and more can quickly and quietly nudge you. They just keep nudging you a little bit this way, a little bit this way, a little bit that way. And we're subtly being manipulated into accepting what the bot is saying to us. So that is what the control element of communication can do, right? Your constant feedback loop about what, and with every action going through that, I think there's at every moment in the day, it can impact our identity, right? It can show us things that are going to nudge us this way. It can present us with things, visions of beauty or ugliness or goodness or badness with a repetition in order to do that. And, you know, this is something that we see already in relation to different forms of computational propaganda that we use on large groups of people, but the same things can be used on individual people. Say you don't like somebody who is trans or something like that. You can slowly nudge them into hating themselves, right? That is the concern about identity, right? That is just the brute repetition that is available and that can be subtly moved through a constant repetition.
Thank you. Thank
Sure.
you.
Okay. I'll be back.
I don't want to take the word away from the students.
Sure.
But I can't resist. So you mentioned the investors, and we all know Elon Musk and Sam Altman, who thinks that children are just as energy,
Right.
you know, as much of an energy consumer as AI is. But I want to ask you about states. I worry about the state actors and governments because they can step in, and there is effectively a kind of competition between China and the US. Saying, oh no, we have to have AI because China has AI. Oh no, Chinese and embedding AI in the Czech Republic in universities is not happening the same way it's happening in the US or in China. I taught in Shanghai a while ago. So that's kind of my worry. And also not just in relation to government stepping in and investing and eventually also bailing out a lot of these investors, but also the much less talked about AI like the Project Maven, Palantir, really for kind of war efforts. We now know that the Iranian, unfortunate, you know, as they say, oh yeah, that was just a mistake. We bombed a girls' school because we didn't really update anything. We know that was part of Project Maven.
Right.
And they were
Which is
blaming it on AI, you know, like,
That's-
oh no, it was AI, not other people. What do you think about that? I mean, I'm more optimistic about, you know, like people will sort of go, oh, this is much money that I don't want to lose. But I am more worried about people like Trump, who may just think, why doesn't the government invest billions of dollars?
Well, we kind of already see that happening in the United States, right? The DOJ, the Department of Government, they gave a bunch of 22-year-olds some AI and said, eliminate everything with words we don't like in it, right? So I have colleagues with grants who just found out that AI had cut their grant, right? So what the lesson I learned from that, though, as dystopic as it is that it's kind of bad at what it does, right? They fired a bunch of people and then slowly and quietly started hiring them back because AI couldn't do the work of governance, right? So there are some people that I mentioned Ted Chiang. I just happened to go to a talk that he was at, talking with him, and he said, you know, there's a good possibility that it will never get better than it is right now, right? That we may be seeing apex level AI, in terms of what it can do. So, you know, So there's that side, that it's not good at what it does, so that governance won't work out well and people will complain and they'll have to slowly but surely get it out there. The other thing I would say, and I agree with your concern, is that one of the things, I've come to think that one of the things that democratic governance and even bureaucracies do well, because there's so many people there, is it's a kind of form of due diligence, right? It's people looking at things, and there's much more chance, and it's slow, but people say, that's not good. Let's stop that, right? So that's also risk management for a society as well. So some of the things that AI would like us to think of as inefficiencies is also keeping us from blowing ourselves up, right? So the AI industry is very much involved, as you say, in something that looks a lot like the arms race, right? We have to be the first to get to artificial general intelligence, because if the Chinese do it first, we're all doomed, right? Those things usually don't work out for the societies that get involved in those kind of races at all. So I share your concern about large organizations. And again, AI hopes that all governments will do it. They hope that all businesses will do it. They hope that all academics will do it. But I think that in the end, there's also something beautifully, inefficient about people that does the work better. That actually produces better governance, that actually produces a less risky situation. The Anthropic, again, who did the bomb of the school at the same time they were doing all these other things. They have this new thing, Mythos, their new version. I don't know if you read the news about this. This is the one that has got everybody abuzz, because it was so bad that they decided not to release it, because it apparently can hack into anything. So that anybody with this, you could, let's shut off the power grid in Czechia today. That's what it can do. And so they haven't released it. I do very much worry that a psychopath like Trump might get his hands on it, and we're doomed. And so there's that dystopic side to it that I do worry about a lot. Let me also say that sometimes I worry that the dystopic stuff is part of the fantasy of AI, that even by saying how terrible it can be, that we're like, wow, it sure is powerful. Maybe I should shovel more money at it and we'll make sure it's good, right? So yeah, I share a lot of your concerns about it being that states will adopt this as a form of governance.
So first things first, thank you for the lecture. It was very enlightening. And my question to you is, we've sort of touched on of course, the AI bubble bursting, as well as the sort of problem preceding it, in my opinion, which is huge data brokers being extant, such as Google. Do you, what are your projections for the future in that sort of field? Will the situation improve? Will there be more data brokers? Will we descend into a dystopian technocracy that entirely relies on Google?
Well, I have to say, I've as somebody who teaches about this stuff, I'm always trying to tell my students about what's happening in the European Union, because at least in the European Union and Canada and Australia and other places that aren't governed by technology, bureaucrats, you have some kind of attempt at self-governance. You have sometimes an attempt at regulation based on public interest principles, right? Right now in America, the tech industry has convinced Donald Trump, who's very easy to convince of anything, that if we regulate it, we'll lose to China, right? So all guardrails are off, and you're seeing the results. So I think Europe has digital privacy laws. They're also considering here some restrictions on data brokers, who, as you say, is a huge secondary market of data. So it really doesn't, you probably all check those things. Do you want, click the box, do you want us to use your data? Well, it doesn't matter anymore, because there's secondary market for it. Can triangulate that with every time you swipe your card at a store, they have all that data for you that they can find, right? Facebook is a huge data broker. So that also will need to be regulated, right? So I'm a big believer that policy matters, that laws matter, and that disciplining these companies who, in America, they say all the time, they come before Congress, the politicians scream at them and they beg them, pass some laws that we have to follow, because if not, then they just have their shareholders to answer to, and their shareholders just want quarterly returns, right? So laws actually discipline these companies. I have a hope right now in relation to things like data privacy and whatnot, that the suits bubbling through the U.S. courts, where they, for instance, there was just one in New Mexico and one in California, where they, what happened was that somebody sued them because their stuff was addictive. This is YouTube and Instagram Meta. Because their internal research says, hey guys, our stuff is addictive. And the internal memos also say, how can we make it more addictive, right? And so this is going to lead to suits, class action suits, and that's going to discipline these companies to do better. I think laws are very important about this stuff. So.
Thank you for your answer.
Sure.
That's really reinforced my hope for the future.
That's good. Thank you. Any questions? Okay.
You know that after all of our conversations, we're on the same page. And so thank you again for your lecture and all that you've said. I thought just for the sake of argument and for the room and for fun to do a consideration. You talked about the analyses of art and how we understand art. And I'm wondering, just for our consideration, as I think of myself as somebody who's older and the ways in which I understood art and came to understand it as a musician, and looked at the disruptive technologies around like rap or hip hop when it first came out, and how I struggled to think of that. And of course, the industry as well invested in it, and it's moved in particular ways. It's an imperfect analogy, but I'm wondering, can you imagine any ways in which AI operates as a disruptive, sort of productive set of affordances for our society, in the sense of, if we can take away many of the impulses that you're talking about, or if it falls and collapses upon itself, how would we consider the potentiality of AI to contribute to the vision that you see in terms of actually enhancing our understanding of communicative democratic practices? And the other thing is, just this is from my standpoint, is I struggle sometimes as an educator to keep up with, for example, understanding that the Lego videos from Iran are not funny, but to so many people they are, right? And so that sense of humor, that sense of assessment of art, I always have to check myself, because I wonder in some ways if I'm judging from an outstanding sensibility which has evolved in some ways. They're kind of two different questions. So I guess the first would be the question of affordances that you see contributing to your vision, that AI could be maybe rewired. Is that not even possible, I guess? And then this second thing is about this understanding of what's taking place in terms of assessing to culture beyond sort of the political economy understanding that you've given us, the potentialities for it to be perhaps re-understood in different ways from different, maybe more youthful perspectives. Or is that, I don't know, ideology?
So I'll start with the first one and then struggle with the second one. In the first sense, this is a big debate right now. There's an Audre Lorde thing, the master's tools can never dismantle the master's house. That you're always going to, if you're using the tools, you're using the tools, right? On the other hand, I've heard this statement: the street finds a way, right? That people find a way to use these things to do disruptive things that might tumble things down. That's the same debate we had about colonialism, right? And all that. And I don't know the answer to that per se. My remarks today are kind of saying that no matter what we use it for, if we're running everything up through the cloud and looking at the cloud for help or answers or whatever, that's kind of an authoritarian way of being, right? So sure, it can help. And I think, again, it's important to understand that AI we're already using it. You may use spell check on your things. If you're doing creative work, you're probably using Pro Tools, that work well with this stuff in your post-production. If you're using music, you're using it to smooth out sounds or doing. So again, we're using little bits of AI, and I guess I'm more talking about the generative large language models side of it. In terms of the aesthetics, that's part of the answer. Again, I think that I really like this view of art that I mentioned in this, which Ted Chiang has of it, as concentrated intentionality, right? So not to get on your anti-hip hop thing, no, but you know that there's even those choices of using the tools, if they're a deliberate, intentional layering of sounds and things using the stuff, it's still concentrated intentionality. What I don't like are the let's make a song, right? That's not concentrated intentionality, and that cheapens everything. You know, there's these suits going on right now in Japan about the Studio Ghibli effect, you know. So you may love the movies of the Studio Ghibli or Ghibli, I don't know how to pronounce that, but their whole case against the multi-million-dollar suit against the OpenAI for this is that we spend, months doing 5 seconds of those things by hand, and you're allowing slop videos to be made of that at the push of a button. It cheapens our work, right? That's what I'm concerned about. If art, it takes people months to write a one-page short story, one that's good. And the idea that it can be done at a press of a button, if we rely on our codependency with the cloud, that's the concern I have about what's impinging on, again, that view of art as concentrated intentionality.
Okay. Question? Okay, good. Thank you.
Two questions from me. First of all, thank you for the lecture. It's, I think, a breath of fresh air in the Czech public debate. My first question is related to your personal experience when you talk to people about AI, because I recalled on the 1st of January, we had this family party, and my family members, they asked me, so you are the social scholar, so tell us about this AI thing. How do you see the future? And personally, I am pretty much on the side of not supporting AI as it is, large language models and so on. But I found it that we speak a bit of a different language. They are very much inside this whole imaginary of it being inevitable, it being maybe not perfect, but still useful. So I wanted to ask about your personal experience when you talk. For example, you mentioned that at Penn State, you are forced more or less by the administration to use AI in your work. What has your experience been in talking to other people about maybe the threats or downsides of AI? And the second question I would need to think about for a second because I forgot what I wanted to ask.
I'll come back to it. So I'm department head, right? So I having clawed my way to middle management, I now go to a lot of meetings with administrators. And it has frightened me how quickly because we have a new provost at Penn State, and kind of head academic officer, who has created all these incentive systems and all these, he wants AI everywhere. And it has frightened me how quickly people say, yes, I'll do that this week, right? So I find myself in this position of feeling like I'm losing my mind, and like, you people are good researchers, you do wonderful work, there's nothing wrong with what you do. Why are you obeying in advance, right? So that's kind of partly what I think about with this, which is that it's socially as a phenomena, it does inform my thinking about authoritarianism, right? Because you see people kind of so quickly moving to this thing without thinking of the consequences of getting on board, right? That's kind of been my experience. And yeah, like your family, my family and my friends from home and growing up, a lot of them just repeat that inevitability, right? And that capitalist realism, we used to call that, right? And that is kind of part of the project that I would like to be doing, which is popping the bubble on that, like getting people to say, well, what about X, Y, and Z, and what about the other thing, and how do you think they're going to make that money back, and what is it doing, and have you ever seen it do anything good? So a lot of people, when they use it, are amazed by it, right? That like, if you say, write me an action plan based on this, or read all my emails and do this, it can look like it is doing amazing things. But most of the time when you poke on that just a little bit, you see it's completely wrong. Like, so they told lawyers, for example, you don't need to hire junior associates anymore because the AI will do it for you. If you need a brief, you just say, give me a brief on this. But what they found was it was making up like case law that didn't exist. It was completely wrong. And so you started to see in the US court system some judges saying, I'm going to fine you if you give me another brief generated by AI because you're wasting my time, right? So again, if you look under the hood a little bit, it doesn't do what it says it's going to do very well. So a lot of what I like to do with students and people who like your family and like my family say, but in the future it will, is say, what's the proof of that? Like, what's the material proof that it actually can do what it says it's going to? So like anything where they're selling you, like AI knows that I'm a middle-aged man losing my hair and feeling overweight all the time. So it jams things in my cerebral cortex every day, telling me the solution to that. I'm pretty much sure that none of that is good, right? I think there's a study that says that 40% of the ads now are on Meta products, especially Facebook, are fraudulent, right? And I think there's something fraudulent about this moment. If you think about the rules that we use to evaluate AI is the Turing test, right? You all know the Turing test. The Turing test, Alan Turing, who kind of came up with the first machines that do this, said the test of whether it's effective is whether it can fool a human being into believing that it is, right? Or that fool us into believing that it's a human being that reproduced that. There's something about that if you think of the mode of production, reproducing social relations and that mirror that. I think we're creating a world where we're fooling each other about what we are capable of doing. We're fooling each other that we're capable of doing work, that we're capable of doing art, and we're fooling ourselves that we are capable of doing all these things when we can't. So we're kind of creating a society that follows the Turing test, and that to me is an issue. So. But when you point that out to people, it's like the emperor has no clothes moment, in the if you once just a couple people start to say, hey, the emperor's naked, the illusion is broken. And I think, back to the question of when the bubble will break, it'll be when enough people say the emperor has no clothes.
Okay, thank you for the answer, and I think it actually ties nicely to my second question. When I was listening to your lecture, I noticed that you give a lot of agency to the technology companies and authoritarian governments, but I was thinking, where is actually the space for the agency of us, the people with not that much not power that is obvious to someone who is looking at the macro structures of the society. So where do you see space for us to actually contribute to changing the situation that we are at right now?
Doing stuff like we're doing right now, talking, deliberating, getting outside the bubble, right? Not asking AI for solutions to the things that we're doing, working on things together. I came to Europe. I've been here for several days now. And so I was here when the election in Hungary happened. And before I came here, I was fatalistic about this, right? I was like, there's no way that Orban's going to lose. He has the whole system kind of crooked to his thing. He's gerrymandered everything. He's controls all the media. But what happened? People said, we're going to show up. We're going to get him out. Right? And by huge numbers, that to me gives me a lot of hope. And that's where the agency is. It's in people's, it's in solidarity, it's in conversations, it's in those things that you don't run through AI, right? So again, I think those are going to be important. Yeah.
Okay, we have time for one last question. Who will have the honor of asking the one last question? If there is. Okay, I see one. Great. Thank you.
I would like to follow up to my colleagues and also thank you for that lecture. It was a pleasure to witness it. And I would like to ask you about your experience as an educator and knowledge worker, considering AI usage in your students. Because honestly, at Masaryk University, a couple of times I bore witness to situations when educators recommended to use AI for certain aspects that they were not able to explain properly when the audience failed to understand, I have heard recommendations like, well, probably you should come home and just ask ChatGPT about it. And honestly, I was a bit disappointed by it because I wanted to have an expert in that topic and teaching to help us to come to some sort of understanding. But I do feel that the problem emerging from that type of communication can be witnessed at all levels.
So as an educator, this is becoming a big problem for educators. Like, we used to think that one of the ways of evaluating students' knowledge was by the work that they produced, right? So write a paper on whatever topic you're describing there and show me that you understand it, right? And then you judge the flow of ideas, you judge whether they grasp things, and now you don't know if that's true or not, right? So a lot of my colleagues are going back to the old school way of doing things, blue books, where you write in class, and so you can tell if there's actually something in there, right? There's these studies that MIT did actually that are really interesting. They like these studies where they hooked people up to MRI machines to see what their brains were doing when they were doing work and learning with AI. Turns out it's completely superficial. There's nothing going on back here. That's just kind of a pass-through. So I think learning is something like doing exercise, right? You don't get stronger just by, in America, every time after Thanksgiving, which is the time when we all overeat, you'll see lots of ads about the abductor, which is an electronic thing. You just you zap yourself in the gut and you're going to have shredded abs, right? We all know that's not true, right? But it's similarly with AI doing the work. There's not really much learning going on. So this is a challenge for us. Our academic integrity cases with plagiarism have exponentially gone like this. And so one of the things that a lot of my colleagues are doing right now is they'll put the prompt inside the prompt in like a white font and super small font size. They'll put something that will have the AI give them, use this particular word in your answer. So when they read through it, they can tell that this was generated. So faculty are starting to figure this out and starting to figure out how they can tell, but it's a huge problem. So, and again, I think, maybe we're going to have to go back to something a little bit even more old school, which is to say, let's have oral exams, or, let's think about what we're doing is training people to be good speakers, instead of just good writers, because we can't tell if that's working anymore. So yeah, it's a moment. And in like many moments of disruptive dynamism, it's going to make us all have to rethink our practices. Some of my faculty don't want to do that. They're like, I like the way I do things. And we're like, well, that may have to change. And I'm having to think about this now. I moved during COVID, I moved a lot of my quizzes and exams online, and I kept doing that because students seemed to prefer it. But now I don't know if they know anything, because there are now these products. I think one of them is, Orwellianly called Einstein, that you can just attach it to your, I don't know what platform you all use here online. We use Canvas, which is use Blackboard or one of those. Anyway, maybe you haven't gotten there yet, but yeah.
Yeah, we have our own information system.
I wish we would do that, right? Because ours is owned now by a huge mega corporation, and I worry where my intellectual property is going. But you can attach it to those platforms, and it will do all of your quizzes for the entire semester in like that, right? And that's kind of dystopic. As an educator, I don't know now how to evaluate whether my students know anything. And so those are all huge challenges. So the economy is going to have to think it very much about how we assess things and how we give feedback and iterative kind of, help to people who are doing things in relation to that. So yeah, that's all an issue.
Okay, thank you so much for
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the lecture.